looking through the book of Exodus, and I didn't really know there was this much for me to learn in the book of Exodus when I've read it before. I've always just read about Moses and what he did and all that, and I was like, that was great, but I really didn't know how to apply it to me until we've been in this series. And we've been in this series of going from failure to freedom, that so often we get stuck in the failure part and we don't know how to reach this freedom part of it. And so every bit of this story of Exodus has been leading up to today. So to catch you up to speed, if you've missed a little bit, we've came into the book of Exodus and we're like, there are people that the Israelites, they're in bondage, the Egyptians have them, and life is rough. Life is rough there. And so then this guy named Moses comes along and he frees them. And so they go to the Red Sea and it parts and they go through it. Then they get to the promised land and then they chicken out. And then God says, okay, you missed the boat on this. So I'm gonna let you be in the wilderness for 40 years. That's where we're at in the story, okay? That was Exodus. That was the Cliff Notes version, really fast, okay? So here we are. We're in the wilderness. It's been 40 years, and spoiler alert, we are going to get to the promised land. Some of you are like, yes, finally. It's been a long 4 or 5 weeks with this. We're finally going to get to the promised land. Yes, there's a message of this is the easy one where you just say, everything's going to be great after this. No. In fact, that's what I thought, is that John said, I need you to take us into the promised land. I was like, yes, I will gladly take us into the promised land. And he kind of did this smile that he does, and I'm like, oh, he knows something that I don't know. And he was like, just work on that. I'm like, oh, okay. Because that's what I love and dislike about God, is that right when I think I have it all figured out, he goes, yeah, read a little bit deeper. And that's what I also love about Scripture. And so this is the part of the story where we're picking up at today. So we're looking at the promised land. That's kind of what we've been talking about. We've mentioned it multiple times throughout the week. So we can talk about the promised land, the promised land, the promised land. And so if you're new to this, you're going what is the big deal about this promised land? Why is this something that's such a big deal? Why does it keep being spoken about? Because here's the thing. This is where God made a promise that they were going to get this land. Okay, sometimes God is really simple and intentional, okay? He made a promise about this land, so that's why we call it the promised land. And so for generations to come, they kept saying, God has promised us this land. This land is coming. We're going to be able to go there. This is what's coming. And this is for years, you guys. And so it was such a big deal for them because they keep going, okay, God, you promised this, but are you really going to follow through with it? You know that was in the back of their minds and things because so much time had gone by with this, because if you remember, the first time this was actually mentioned was back in Genesis, and here was the scripture that came from it. We was talking to Abraham. So the Lord made a covenant with Abram that day and said, I have given this land to your descendants all the way from the border of Egypt to the great Euphrates River. So he's talking to Abraham. We've not talked about Abraham for a while now. Abraham is long gone, okay? And he said, don't worry. I'm going to give you this land. It's coming. And so Abraham passes it along. They're passing it along generation to generation to generation. And so now we're finally at the part of the story where we're like, they're going to get to go into the promised land. But before I read you the scripture, before we get into actually the book of Joshua, I need to let you know one thing, because combining all of these stories together is that, you see, we've been talking about this guy named Moses. Moses, if you remember, he was the guy that God came and said, hey, you're going to do this. And he was like, hey, I stutter. I don't think I can do this. And God says, you are going to do this because I'm going to be with you. I'll let you bring Aaron along. You need to do this. There was this whole burning bush situation. And then there were the 10 Commandments. And then he goes to Pharaoh and tells him a gazillion times, let my people go. Pharaoh says no. There are all these plagues, like frogs coming, all kinds of craziness out of the sky. Then they free him, and then they're going to the Red Sea, and with God's help, Moses raises a staff, the waters part, they walk through it, the Egyptian army dies afterwards. Then they get to the promised land. They go, oh, there's too many problems in there. There's too many scary people in there. Those problems are bigger than God's promises. And so God says, you're going to chill in the wilderness, but Moses is still going to lead you. You see, that guy, Moses, he dies. See, he dies before he ever gets to step foot into the promised land. And I remember reading this being like, no. You know how you like read a book and you're like, that ended wrong? Or you see a movie and you were like, somebody did not do this well. Like it's supposed to end happy. And I'm like, why? Moses. Like he did all of this and then he didn't get to go into the promised land. And so then I couldn't even like move forward with this because I was like, why? Because you see, I've grown up in church and I didn't know the answer as to why God didn't let Moses enter into the promised land. And so I don't know where you're at with this. I don't know if you've grown up in church. I don't know if you're even a Christian or not. If you are not a Christian and you are here, I am so glad that you are here in this place. But also, if you are a Christian in the room, I also don't assume that you know all the parts of the story because I didn't know this part of the story. I literally went back and told my parents at the first service, and I was like, I didn't learn some things in Sunday school growing up. Like, they skipped over this part. They didn't go like, okay, let's pause for a minute. Let's talk about why Moses didn't go into the promised land. No, because that wasn't a happy part of it. And so I will tell you this, a little sidebar of things, is this is why it's so important for you to read scripture for yourself. Because as the church and as people telling you, we can only talk through so much of it up here, and there are key parts that end up going missing or end up not being spoken about, not intentionally, just because we're hitting the highlights, if you will, over things. I would tell you that's why it's so important that we've got to be reading the scripture, because in that moment I went, I can't even go any further because I'm like, why? Why did Moses not get to go into the promised land? And so I started reading, and they actually said, because Moses disobeyed God. And I was like, okay, once? You know, I'm like looking at my own life, and I'm like, okay, God, because I've messed up a lot, and you still keep letting me do stuff. Like, what's the deal? Moses did all of this, and then one time. But here's what happened. You see, they were out in the wilderness. God's providing for everything from them. Literally, bread is falling from the sky. It's amazing, except for the fact that they're in the wilderness. And the people start coming and they say, we're thirsty. And so Moses says, God, they're thirsty. And so God says, okay, here you go, Moses. I need you to take your staff and I need you to hit the rock and then water will come out. So Moses says, okay. So he goes and he hits the rock 2 times. And then he says, look what I did. I gave you water. Here are a few things that happened is that in that moment, you see, God told him to hit the rock once. He hit the rock twice because he didn't believe that the first time that God would actually provide the water. And then he said, look what I did. And God was like, oh, no, brother. You didn't do that. I did that. And so in Numbers 20:12, it actually said, but the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you did not trust me enough to demonstrate my holiness to the people of Israel, you will not lead them into the land that I am giving them. And here was the crazy part to me is that didn't just happen and then he died like the next day. Like God tells him, you're not going to go into the promised land, but guess what? You still get to lead these people. And Moses did it. Moses continued to lead his people even when that final thing, even when like the light at the end of the tunnel, even when what he knew he was called to do, he would not get to do it. He still continued to lead his people. Now that right there, friends, that's a leader. That's an amazing man to be able to do that, but that's a whole nother sermon right there on Moses. But I was like, why? Why did that happen? And then who is this that came next? Like, that's all great. So Moses is still leading. He knows he's not going to go into the promised land. So you know he has to be thinking, okay, but who's going to do it? Like, I've been with these people the whole time. So, okay, God, who is it that's going to lead these people? And so then comes along Joshua. Now, Joshua is a name, if you remember, that we've heard before because he's been around. In fact, it was him and Caleb, along with 10 other guys, that went into the promised land that first go round. They were spies. They wanted to see what was going on in there. And when they came back, it was actually Joshua and Caleb that said, this was the land that God has promised us. We need to go ahead and take it now. And the other 10, they were the chickens. They were like, no. There's giants. They're all way too big. We're like ants compared to them. We can't do all this. And so everybody listened to them, and that's when God said, awesome. You can chill in the wilderness for 40 years. So Joshua has seen the promised land. He knows what's in there, but he's also seen what happens when people don't trust God. You see, Joshua was also able to watch Moses lead these people in the wilderness for this amount of time. And there was a lot of complaining. There was a lot of grumbling. There was also a lot of death. Because then, as the scriptures tell us, is that actually in that entire generation of unbelievers, basically, of the unbelief, they died off, and who was left was Joshua. So he's watched all of this happen. He's watching Moses lead. He's kind of helping lead. He's helping lead. You guys, this was my naive brain. I thought it was like a number like this. No. They were leading over 2 million people. That's a lot of people. And that's a lot of grumbling and complaining. And that's a lot of people that were trusting in this leader, trusting in Moses. And so then God tells Moses, nope, you don't get to enter into the promised land. I'm not even going to tell you the whole full story. It's like God's going like, I'm going to send somebody else. Like there's going to be somebody else that comes up. And his name is going to be Joshua. And so when we pick up in Joshua chapter 1, Moses has literally just died. And so this is what God starts telling Joshua. So we pick up on Joshua chapter 1, verse 1 says this. After the death of Moses, the Lord's servant, the Lord spoke to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' assistant. So he was like high up, okay? Like he was Moses' right-hand man. He said, Moses, my servant, is dead. Therefore, the time has come for you to lead these people, the Israelites, across the Jordan River into the land I am giving them. Okay, stop right there. I think I would be freaking out at this point. Like I was the assistant. I was not like vice president knowing I was going to be president one day. Like this is here. And he's going, hey, by the way, Moses died. You're up. Let's go. And I can't imagine what was going through in his brain, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, because then God says this to him. He says, I'm going to promise you what I promised Moses. Wherever you set foot, you will be on land I have given you. From the Negev wilderness in the south to the Lebanon mountains in the north, from the Euphrates River in the east to the Mediterranean Sea in the west, basically everywhere, including all the land of the Hittites. No one will be able to stand against you as long as you live. That should have been comforting for Joshua. For I will be with you as I was with Moses. I will not fail you or abandon you. He goes on to say this. So be strong and courageous, for you are the one who will lead these people to possess all the land I swore to their ancestors I would give them. Like finally, this is happening. But be strong and very courageous, in case you didn't hear me the first time. Be careful to obey all the instructions Moses gave you. Do not deviate from them, turning either to the right or to the left. Then you will be successful in everything that you do. So study this book of construction, continually meditate on it day and night, so you will be sure to obey everything written in it. Only then will you prosper and succeed in all you do. This is my command for the third time. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or discouraged, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. And so then the story goes that Joshua then goes back to all of his leaders and his officers, and he's like, here's the plan. We're going to overtake this. We are going in 3 days. I'm like, what? Are you crazy? Like this just happened. Like maybe we need like a week to like get a game plan together of what's happening. No, he's like, here it is. Here's what God's told me. Here's what we're going to do. Here's what Moses' plan was. We're going in 3 days. And so then he tells them all of this, and they didn't say, you're insane. They said, we'll do whatever you command. We'll do whatever you command, and we will go wherever you send us, because we trust you as the leader. We'll obey you just as we obeyed Moses. And may the Lord your God be with you as he was with Moses. And anyone who rebels against your orders, does not obey your words, and everything you command will be put to death. They were hardcore. They were like, and anybody that says no, we got your back. And so then they say to him, so be strong and be courageous. So when they get to the promised land for the second time, they know they have to push through. Why? Because they were like, we know how this went down the first time. We know we've got to be able to push on and push through. And so in my brain, I thought of Joshua as this like young guy that finally like God said, let's go, like you're in, you're up. And he was like, yes, I've been waiting my whole life for this. Let's go. Because I figured he was kind of like young and dumb, if you will. But then I was like, wait, that wasn't it at all. Joshua, there was fear in him. And how do I know this is because God told him multiple times, be strong, be courageous, don't be afraid, don't be discouraged. I am here with you. And this was a key part for me as I'm going, God's telling us very similar things to what he was telling Joshua. Because I believe that for a lot of us right now where we're at, we feel like we've been in a wilderness. Some of us for 40 years. Like we know God's there, God's still been there, but we also know that there's like a promised land, that there's something that God has promised us and we want so badly to step into it, but we don't know how to step into it. And maybe we've been following somebody else and that person's now gone and now it's just us and we're like, what do I do now? And I believe that in that moment that God is telling us, like he was telling Joshua, the very first thing is, I need you to be courageous. So he said, be strong. I think that's important too. There's something about the word courageous. It means you can't be afraid. It means you have to dig down deep. You have to have courage, something that's got to come from something deep within, because he knows that what's going to happen is going to be hard. Here was the crazy part for me, is that getting into the promised land is not easy. Just because it has a nice name, like the promised land, doesn't mean that all of a sudden you step foot into it and you're like, woohoo! Because if you remember, they have to go and they have to fight because there's already people in this land. So just by stepping into the promised land, it wasn't going to be easy, but God knew this and God knew what they needed to hear, and God knows what we need to hear, and that is to be courageous. But I would take it a step further and say, God was telling him something else, because he was telling him, I need you to make sure that you're reading the word. Like you have this, like the law of Moses, you have all these things, you have scripture. He's telling us today, you have scripture, you have the guidebook, you have the instruction manual, you have all this. It's called the Bible. I need you to read it, to meditate on it day and night. Why? Because I need you to be confident. I need you to be confident in me. God is telling Joshua, oh, I need you to be confident in me. Because then once you're confident in me, then you can be confident in the man that I have called you to be. And that was a key thing right there, because you see, I think that's where Moses kind of missed the boat at the very end, is that he stopped being confident in God. And I don't know why. I don't know if like maybe because he had seen all these miracles for so long, and then he was like, we'll see what happens. Or maybe it was because he really started becoming too confident in himself that he was like, watch this. I don't know what really happened at the end of that, but what I know is that there's something different with Joshua, and that God was telling him, let me be sure you are ready and that we can do this together. And I need you to be courageous, and I need for you to be confident. So what he's saying, even in this be confident, he's going like, I need you to be rooted. That's what he's telling us. I need you to know these scriptures. I need you to know who I am. The only way you're going to do that is if you are rooted. But then I still kept looking back, and I did this whole comparison thing, which is sometimes not a good idea, but Moses and Joshua. And I really was like, what really was it that stopped Moses from getting to go into the promised land? Because I feel like I can probably relate to it. And what stopped Moses from getting to the promised land was his pride. I believe that pride stopped him from getting in there because he started having confidence in himself. And here's the key thing about pride that sometimes we miss a lot of time, is pride can be, look, I can do it. Look at me go. Some of us have been doing that for a long time. Some of us can't figure out why we're really tired. It's because we keep just doing it all ourselves when it was never ours to do in the first place. It's always been God's. But then the other thing is, pride's also this: when you still think too much about yourself, even if you think negatively about yourself. If you keep going, God, I can't do that. God, that's not for me. God, you didn't make me that way. God, I have anxiety. God, I have worries. I have this. I can't do. It's still I. There's still a pride thing with it. And I believe that too often that our pride keeps us from the prize, that our pride keeps us from those promises. But too often it's just easier to say, God, what are you doing? And he's like, what are you doing? And too often we're like, I. There it goes again. And he goes, you're right there. What's stopping you? I believe it's the pride for a lot of us. And I also believe that somehow it's our need to control things. Because for some of us, we're like, I can take you to the promised land. Let's go. Come on, I can do this. I can save you. I've got the path. I'm going to do this. I'm here because I want to be in control because it scares me to death what it looks like if God actually took control right now. And so what then that looks like is it looks like you have confidence because you're in control. But here's what I also learned is that our need for control gives us false confidence. Because if we were to actually give up control to God, we would have confidence in him and we could actually step forward into the promised land. But we have this need, we're holding onto things that is stopping us from getting there. And I was like, man, that's good and all, but like, why did Joshua not struggle with this? Like, why was it something that Moses struggled with? And then here's a key thing I learned about Joshua. Do you know that wasn't always his name? I love this about the Bible. Like, God changes people's names. It's so cool. I'm glad he didn't do that now because I can barely remember all of y'all's names like right now. So if he changed everybody's name right now, that'd be very confusing. But with Joshua, his name used to be Hosea. And Hosea meant saves. And then when he changed his name to Joshua, you know what Joshua means? It means God saves. You see, God knew even in that moment, he needed to change his name to be a constant reminder to him that Joshua, you're not going to be the one doing it. I'm going to be the one doing it. I just need you to obey. I need you to be courageous. I need you to be confident in me and go do what I told you to do. That's how you're going to cross into the promised land. And then the other part for me was this. In looking at both the leaders, God knew exactly what his people needed when they needed it. Did you know that Moses, he was a great spiritual leader? How do I know this? Because he led them for 40 years in the wilderness, and there was not a revolt where they all said, forget God, bye, I'm gone. Because he was able to keep God at the forefront of all of it. He was an amazing spiritual leader, and they needed that in the wilderness. But then Joshua comes along, and Joshua was built for spiritual battle, but he was also built for the actual battle ahead. He has amazing military strengths. God knew exactly what his people needed, even before they knew they needed it. And so for me, I was like, oh, so often I wanted to be like Moses. Yeah, I read the whole story. Growing up, I was like, I want to be like Moses. I can use my strengths for God. I can do all this. And then I was reading this and I was like, I don't want to be like Moses. God, I was just kidding. I was like, I want to be like Joshua. I want to like take everybody through to the promised land. They read a whole book of the Bible about me. You see how it's still about me? And then I thought about it, is that so often we're like a link on a chain. And we all have different links. We're each one. You can find yourself wherever you want to be on here. We're all different, but yet we all are the same, really. We all have strengths, we have weaknesses, we have all that. They all work together, and it's great. But for some reason, we always want to be this one. We want to be like bigger and better and shinier and different. And how do I know this? Because there's so many self-help books and stuff out there about like how to be more productive, how to be like a better mom, how to be a better this, how to be a better that, how to be different, how to get everything done in 24 hours when you have everything that needs to be done in like 48 hours. Like all of this, we want more. We're not content with where we are on this link. And so I really started thinking about like what made Joshua an amazing leader is that he knew his gifts. He knew, he was confident in who God created him to be, and that's how he was able to succeed. And you see, even Paul tells us in Romans later, he starts talking about, he says, you know what, don't conform to all the stuff of the world. Like, you want to be all this like shiny stuff and all that, don't do all that. And hey, don't think any better of yourself than you really are. Because here's the deal, I've given all of you gifts, and they all actually work together for things. So you need to be content with your link. You need to be content with what God has given you, because you know what the key part of all this is this. Sometimes we can be like, oh, that's Joshua. He was great. He did all that. No, friends, that's not Joshua. This was Joshua. He was just a regular guy. He was out in the wilderness with everybody else. He had some strengths. They had some strengths, had some weaknesses and all that. He helped lead them to that, because here's the thing. This is Jesus. This is God. This is what happened, is that Joshua then said, I can't do this alone. I have all my people, but there's something else. I've linked arms with all my people, but I've got to attach myself to something else. And so he said, I've got to be courageous and I've got to be confident in God, and I'm going to be content on my link, and I'm going to attach myself to God. And friends, this is what we are called to do, because I think too often we've attached ourselves to something else, and it looks this way. I've attached myself to my past, to my failures, to whatever else is down here, and it's weighing me down, when God's going like, I just want you to attach yourself up here. Why? So I can pull you across. I thought about it today, and I'm like, I think so many times I'm right on the edge of the promised land, and I just need to hook on to God, and he probably needs a big old pickup truck or something just to be able to yank me across into the promised land, because I'm so stubborn hanging out over here. Because you see, what stops us from getting into the promised land, it's not God. It's us. It's our pride. It's our need for control. It's trying to link with other people. It's attaching ourselves to other things that are weighing us back. We're the ones standing in the way. So it sounds so simple, but yet it's so hard with it, is we've got to lay a lot of that stuff down. We've got to lighten the load so that we can attach onto God. And here was the crazy part, is I was looking at this and I was like, you know what? This is what Christian community looks like. Truly. Because watch what happens. If I start getting weak, I have somebody else up here that can pull me up. When you start getting weak, I can remind you that you need to be confident in God, because we're still attached to God, because we're still attached to it. This is what so many of us are longing for, and we're too scared to do it. Guess what? If we're all attached to God, we're all linking arms together, and this, you can't break this. I tried literally at Home Depot. They had to get that special cutter thing to cut this for me. It's not going anywhere. Because here's what I learned last night, is that my faith impacts you. Do you think that Joshua's faith impacted his people? Absolutely. Because if he had struggled in that moment, they wouldn't have walked across into the promised land. My faith impacts you. Your faith impacts me. That's why we've got to be in Christian community. That's why this is so important here at Quest, because here's the thing. It doesn't just stop here. There are more links coming, and this is our next generation. And our next generation needs to know how to be courageous and how to be confident in God and who they are in Him, and to be content in their link. For goodness gracious, they need to know that. But they're not going to get it if we can't get it together, adults. We need to be able to walk, to lead them across into this promised land. We have been called to do that. And we can be like Joshua with that. So my question to you is, what you linked to? What are you attached to? And then I would also ask you, is it working for you? Is it heavy? Is it exhausting? What would it look like to link onto God? Because here's the deal. We need to attach to Jesus, because here it is. It's only when we attach to Jesus that we have the courage and the confidence to step into His promises. So at the end of the day, what's getting in the way? What is getting in the way of you attaching to Jesus? Is it the things that I talked about? Is it your pride? Is it your ego? Is it that you think you can do it all yourself? Or maybe is it your control? That you don't know what it's like to be able to give that fully over to God? Because maybe if you're honest, you say, I don't trust what that looks like. I trust that this thing that's weighing me down, it's not going anywhere, but I don't know where you're going to pull me. Is it maybe that you just need to be content with your link. To spend moments and go, God, you created me for a purpose, and it's amazing. And I want to step into that purpose. I want to stop trying to be like this person and this person and this person, and I just want to be Sarah, your daughter, who has an amazing purpose. I believe that for so many of us, it's so many different things, but I believe across the board, what we want is we all want to be able to step into those promises. And friends, you can. You can step into it. The only thing keeping you in the wilderness is you. So won't you let go of some stuff today? Because his promise is still true. His commands are still true. He says, be strong, be courageous. Do not be terrified. Don't get discouraged with whatever else is out there, with that big problem that's there. Don't get discouraged about it. Would you attach yourself to me? Because I will always be with you, and I will never leave you. All you have to do is attach yourself to me.